Hi, welcome back to another live stream of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. The Global Network was created in 1992 to prevent the arms race from moving into space. You can support the show by clicking on the like button and subscribing to our YouTube channel. And also check out our website at spaceforpeace.org. We thank our Global Network board member, Will Griffin, for doing all the tech work to make this show happen. Excuse me. Our guest this time is my friend, longtime Maine activist and vegetable farmer, Richard Rhames from Biddeford, Maine. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks, Bruce. Good to see you again, if only virtually.
I know, it's good to see you too. I should say that for many years, how many years did you have your Out in Left Field show?
Kind of lost track. I don't know, must have been going on 8, 9, I don't know. But we did a lot of stuff before that. Been involved with public access TV since the early 90s.
Yeah. And so I had a show that also got killed by COVID and called This Issue. You used to come on and you would have me on your show frequently. So we have a long, sordid track record, one might say.
Yeah, sorted's not bad. Yeah.
Well, let's start with an easy question, okay? Are you worried that there's going to be a nuclear war?
Well, it seems to me the United States is doing its very best to provoke that. But as Noam Chomsky used to say, before the United States got as weak as it is now, which is very weak, that the normal tendency of the United States government was, because it was so weak economically, politically, culturally, and so forth in the rest of the world, if it got into a contest with other nations, it would generally try to steer that conflict into the military arena, because as like the world leader in military spending, armaments, and enthusiasm for killing people, the United States has no peer. So if you could shift everything into the military arena, the United States had a better shot than in any other area in terms of imposing its will. So, last time I checked, the United States had had never forsworn the first use of nuclear weapons. During Bill Clinton's administration, the defense posture, so-called, of the United States was to portray the image to the world that the United States was a mad dog. I think that was the term they used, and that we would not shrink from doing something crazy. I think that's still the case. It doesn't get talked about very much in mainstream media, but this mad dog thing, look at what we did in Iraq, look at what we've done in all of our wars of opportunity.
Who do you think's running the show in Washington these days?
Well, it's not a secret that regardless of the quadrennial extravaganzas, the elections we have every 4 years, U.S. policy doesn't change. So it's people with money, as the first the head of the Supreme Court said, many years ago after the country's founding, the people who own the country ought to govern it. And they do. They did, and they do. With the exception of a small, upwelling of popular power back in the late 20s and 30s, when working people actually, got some stuff to benefit the working class. basically the majority of the population is basically a supine role. The working people just don't have any power. I was interested that this guy Dan Lazar, that I like very much and have read a lot of his stuff. He had a recent column where he pointed out that one of the two big things that came out of the most recent congressional hearings on the what do they call it? A putsch, not a putsch. The events of January 6th was that Trump issued an order to the U.S. military to withdraw immediately from Afghanistan. I think he said something about Syria as well. Anyway, the order was countermanded by the U.S. military. Elected officials don't really have much say. So where the power resides, I think it's fairly clear. I'm pretty sure you and I don't have much, though, nor were we ever intended to.
All right. The U.S. NATO are currently escalating tensions with both Russia and China. U.S. is creating NATO partnerships with countries in the Asia Pacific like Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. But why are they doing that? Why are they escalating these tensions today? What's behind it?
Well, I mean, Mr. Obama announced the pivot to Asia, right? I mean, the theater of operations, as I understand it, has been moving toward China, the same game as they've been running against Russia all these years, trying to move political and economic problems into the military sphere. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, the great grand chessboard, I think it was. I mean, he talked fairly openly, and this has always been the deal. The U.S., according to him, and lots of other people before him and after him, the game with respect to Russia was to break it up into its constituent parts, even after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which accomplished part of the game, but they're not satisfied with that. Russia is a very rich country in terms of natural resources. The United States wants that. U.S. corporations wants those resources. And I would guess it's the same thing with China. In Washington, they refer to nations like China and Russia as peer competitors. And the United States doesn't have any problem going to war against nations that can't fight back. But going after nations that can fight back, that have nuclear arsenals, have military hardware, and know how to use it. Normally, the United States has tried to stay out of wars of aggression, wars of opportunity with those nations. With respect to Russia, we're now fighting this kind of surrogate war of opportunity, trying to, as the brass in Washington say, trying to weaken Russia. The United States, as I understand it, now I pull weeds for a living. I don't pretend to really understand this stuff, and I don't read it as extensively as you do. But
I'd say you're pretty much on the mark. Keep going.
Well, and for a while now, the United States has been trying to protect the so-called Uyghurs, I believe, in China, has been trying to make this case that the communist regime in China is not friendly to human rights and that is oppressing certain minorities. I would point out here that Alex Coburn, the late Alex Coburn, used to write all the time about one of the main reasons why Black folks in the United States ever got any kind of entree into the Washington establishment during the 60s was because, while the United States was whining about the evil of, the social situation in Russia, it had its own apartheid regime going here in the United States. And it just didn't play very well. The contrast between what the United States was doing institutionally here and what it was complaining about other nations were doing abroad, it just didn't square. And so there needed to be this pretense on the part of the US government that we weren't really an apartheid state. You can make a pretty good case that we still kind of are.
Yeah.
And we certainly look at how we relate to Saudi Arabia. There's a long list of autocratic, monarchist, human rights unfriendly regimes that the United States is snuggling up to in the diplomatic bed and has been for years. So, I put this basically the United, and I don't remember now the name of it, but this was 2 years ago that the United States engineered this thing. It involved Australia, probably the same thing that you're talking about. Went about getting a NATO-like aggregation of powers together it looked like the express purpose of trying to go to war with China. The freedom of navigation stuff, all that crap, looking for a fight.
Yeah. The Democrats in Washington have become the loudest proponents of war and regime change, particularly with Russia, but also China too. Why have the Democrats gone this direction? For some years, they tried to pretend that they were the peace party, right? What happened?
Well, I think the business about pretend to be the peace party is you said the quiet part out loud there. The Democrats and the Republicans are two wings of the business party, to put it in cliche form. In the recent presidential elections, my tagline has been, "You can't beat something with nothing," and the Democratic Party have nothing. Right? They have moved into their neoliberal realm big time. They're trying to out neoliberal the friggin' Republicans. They got nothing domestically. They have been setting the stage for the privatization of Medicare and Social Security for years. Slick Willie Clinton famously had basically had sent out the orders for the private account cards for Social Security during his regime and was moving that way steadily. And unfortunately, the Monica Lewinsky cigar and the stained blue dress and all of that stuff, it kind of intervened, and he had to bomb Iraq and ditch the private accounts thing. Well, that's coming back as soon as the Republicans, win the election.
Hang on a minute. You mean, and bomb Yugoslavia? Don't forget that.
Well, sure, but that was I think that was a little bit later. I mean, the Yugoslavia thing never gets brought up. When elite opinion is fulminating about the Russia-Ukraine thing these days. But that was grim. I mean, anybody who was kind of paying attention back then, with the United States bombing radio stations, bombing bridges, the people of Yugoslavia were trying to act as human shields on these friggin' bridges, trying to protect the civilian infrastructure. And the US was bombing them. We were bombing tractorcades and trains, civilians trying to get out of Dodge.
And the Chinese embassy.
Yeah, Chinese embassy. Good catch. Yeah. I mean, like I say, mad dog. So that, and that was under a democratic regime, large D, right? The Clinton continued the sanctions regime against Iraq. All this stuff is bipartisan. When Hillary Clinton lost the last election, unexpectedly, they thought, to Donald Trump. One of the points that Trump made was that these wars of opportunity that the U.S. was fighting weren't that great. And so he said, I'm going to stop that. Well, he tried a number of times. He was always overruled by elite opinion and the generals. But anyway, so Hillary lost and immediately set to work on concocting this story that it was not her domestic policies, it was not the Democratic Party's domestic policies over decades that had led to her loss. Instead, it was that evil guy Vlad Putin and Russia, and they hired outfits, Fusion GPS, generated the so-called Steele dossier. Rachel Maddow and the other talking heads of the neolibs then worked for literally freaking years spinning this story. Is sort of like Glenn Beck from the center, right? I don't think Maddow necessarily used the chalkboard. Maybe these illusions are losing people, but anyway, it was nightly rants pushing this thing that somehow Russia and Vlad Putin were the enemies of what passes for democracy in the United States. And basically, this is no accident that we are now on this tear, focusing on this some kind of evil represented by Russia and Vladimir Putin. Maybe you didn't get the memo, Bruce, but as near as I can tell, there's one person in Russia, and that's Vlad Putin. In the same way that there was one person in Iraq, and his name was Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, that's always the playbook. That's always the playbook. Yeah. What do you think about the letter last week that was sent to Biden by 30 House quote unquote progressives, but then they pulled it back the next day? And one of those signers apparently was our own Democrat representative from Maine, Shelley Pingree. What's your take on that?
Well, pathetic. Okay, that's a starter. Yeah, like I said, you can't beat something with nothing. I mean, I think maybe they looked at the polling and saw that last time I checked, something like 70% of the U.S. population wants out of this adventure, and every war, well, maybe with the exception of World War II, when we used the atom bomb, Japan had been trying to negotiate an end to the war for months. And, you know, they didn't get it, and we bombed them. I don't know if that's going to happen this time. Anyway, the population of the United States, that beleaguered majority faction, if you believe the polling, and I think it's credible, based on my random conversations with the few people that I still see when I get out of the out of the chair and out of the field. There's not a lot of enthusiasm for pouring more tens of billions into bombing people in halfway around the world. But at the end of the day, I like to quote Mel Brooks in Blazing Saddles at times like this, where he plays Governor Lepeta, Maine, and when he hears that there's problems in this town, his response is, "Gentlemen, we've got to protect our phony baloney jobs here." At which point there's a bunch of harumphing that goes on from his inside cabinet there. And he says, "I didn't get a harumph from that guy." Whereas the weakling. So anyway, I think, it was a harumph. And they tried to posture, because there's a substantial part of what passes for the base of the Democratic Party that is not all that enthusiastic about spending all of this money killing people and blowing stuff up. But, they got to protect their phony baloney jobs. My understand is that Jaipal, who is looking to try to be, the cheese after the election, Pelosi whispered in her ear, or somebody in the establishment, which is everything down there, said, you're probably nixing your chances of advancement. So anyway, yeah, this old thing, was it Will Rogers? If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Tom Andrews, soon after he won his surprise election many years ago, he used to say all the time, "You can't always make them see the light, but sometimes you can make them feel the heat." Well, Jaipal, Pingree, the rest of them all felt the heat. I mean, Pingree's in an election with this right-wing guy, military background, who is saying the United States isn't being tough enough, right? And the Democrats have always been afraid of looking, quote, weak. Even some Republicans. Remember, one of the reasons why George H.W. Bush got it going with Iraq was he had to overcome the wimp factor. It's bad to look weak when you're at the head of the U.S. behemoth, right? You gotta show you're willing to kill people. In fact, you gotta show that you're enthusiastic about killing people. That's what we do.
I remember when the election presidential debates, George W. Bush, Junior Bush, was running against John Kerry. And in the debates, Kerry said, "I will spend $100 billion more on the Pentagon than George W. Bush will." So, for me, the Democrats have long been sold out. Long. Okay,
well,
moving on.
I want to just remind people that when Kerry, as the nominee, addressed the Democratic convention all those years ago, his first line was, it's saluting, "Reporting for duty," right? When John F. Kennedy went against Dwight Eisenhower, right? No, Richard Nixon, excuse me. But he was running against Republicans slash Ike Eisenhower, who had been in office for 8 years. Remember, his main thing was the so-called missile gap, right? He was arguing that Ike Eisenhower had been soft on the Soviets and soft on the military.
Yeah. Let me move on to another question. Keep an eye on the time. Do you think that war with Russia and China will move into space, where satellites today essentially control all modern warfare? In fact, Elon Musk's 5G Starlink network is being used to provide targeting information to the Ukrainian military today. And so at some point, do you think that we're going to have a problem and there's going to be war in space?
Well, like I said, I pull weeds for a living. The doctrine of the United States is to kill people, take other nations' stuff, to benefit corporations at public expense, and pursue this mad dog, foreign policy. If in fact the tendency of the United States is, as it has long been, the idea of moving things into an arena where it has more power and can exercise power more effectively, then it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, clearly, the United States has been using this GPS technology and all of that. We got a lot of satellites in space. And we use those for targeting these so-called smart weapons that the CNN and the elite media were gushing about during the first attack on Iraq. I mean, a lot of the video that came out of that, as I understand it, was somewhat edited and selectively used, but the impression has been put out for years that somehow this technological sophistication that we have in terms of guided munitions can be used to minimize collateral damage, as they called it, killing a bunch of people that had nothing to do with foreign policy. And I mean, it's already moving into space. It has been in space forever by virtue of this targeting stuff. The Elon Musk thing that you mentioned, that's just another riff on the same theme. But I would point out that I've had this discussion with some younger people over the years who seem to believe this myth that the internet was created by a couple of geeky guys in their garage. DARPA, the United States government, basically did its cost plus thing. Will pay the techno centers, MIT, university systems nationwide and so forth, to develop something called the internet, to share research information among university research departments, mostly with respect to so-called defense, right? So it very, very strongly runs counter to this myth that somehow the entrepreneurial spirit of a couple of geeky guys in a garage somewhere are responsible for the internet and these odious cell phones that everybody is addicted to. That was the United States government that did that.
All right, let me stop you. Let me stop you. We got just over a minute left. Give me a quick take on what farm life is like for you these days. Are you making a living at it still?
Well, we live cheap, so I guess, and not vacationing anytime soon. We had 3 bad years in a row. Climate change is pretty much out of the box. There is no, based on the writing coming out of the United Nations, who've been kind of keeping track of this stuff, there's no foreseeable outcome here that doesn't lead to runaway climate. No nation is even nations not as backward as ours seem incapable of changing things enough to arrest a radical change in the climate. The West in the United States is burning up. Literally, a lot of food in the United States comes from the West. If we survive, Maine should have a brief period where growing conditions won't be as bad in Maine and our part of the northern hemisphere than it will be in places further south. So maybe there's some guarded reason for optimism, but the United States doesn't care. There's food in the supermarkets. Who cares? Who cares about conditions on the ground for farmers?
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate having you on. Take good care. And thank you for watching another edition of Space Alert. We'll be back next month with another show with another guest from the peace movement. Until then, good luck to you all, and please get organized.